So today we're going to talk about the invisible rules that can be tied to a piece of property, sometimes for centuries. They're called Freehold Covenants, and trust me, they can have a surprising amount of power over what you can and can't do with your own home. So let's pull back the curtain on these powerful, hidden promises.
So let me ask you something. Imagine you finally buy your dream house, right? Only to find out that some promise made by a previous owner way back in 1920 stops you from building that extension you've been planning. Sound a little far-fetched? Well, it's not. Welcome to the world of Freehold Covenants.
Okay, so what exactly are we talking about here? At its core, a freehold covenant is pretty simple. It's just a promise written into a deed where one landowner promises another that they'll either do something, we call that a positive covenant, or more often that they won't do something, like build a second story or paint their house a wild color, and that's called a negative or restrictive covenant.
The best way to really get our heads around how all this works is through a story. So let's dive into a classic scenario, the kind of thing that really helps make sense of it all. It starts, as these things often do, with two neighbors.
So, let's meet our original players. First up, we have Tanya. She owns a big piece of land called Greenacre. She decides to sell a part of it to her neighbor, Zoe, and this new, smaller plot is going to be called Blue Acre. Easy enough so far, right?
Now this is where it gets interesting. Tanya doesn't just sell the land and walk away. Nope. She wants to protect the value and feel of her property. So as part of the deal, she gets Zoe to make 3 promises. First, a restrictive one, only build one house. Second, a promise that requires action, to actually build a wall. And third, another action promise, to chip in for the upkeep of their shared driveway.
Okay, fast forward a couple of years. Life happens, and both properties change hands. Tanya sells her land, Greenacre, to a guy named Wissam, and Zoe sells her land, Blue Acre, to someone named Claire. So now, the original people who made the promises, they're out of the picture.
And this right here is the million-dollar question. Does Wissam, the new guy at Greenacre, get the benefit of those old promises? And maybe more importantly, is Claire, the new owner of Blue Acre, stuck with the burden of following them? Well, the answer is way more complex than you might think. To figure this out, we have to start by looking at the traditional rules of what's called the common law. And this is where we hit our first and honestly kind of weird roadblock. And here it is. Get this. The big rule at common law is that the burden of a covenant, the actual obligation to do or not do the thing, does not automatically pass to a new owner. It's basically seen as a personal contract just between Tanya and Zoe. So at first glance, it looks like our new owner Claire is totally off the hook.
Yeah, as this key quote from a famous case shows, the court saw a positive promise as a personal contract. I mean, think about it. Forcing Claire to spend her own money to build a wall would be like making her honor a contract she never even signed. And the law basically said, you just can't do that.
But wait a minute. There's always an exception, isn't there? What about that third promise? The one about paying to maintain the shared driveway. I mean, common sense tells you that if Claire is using the driveway, she should probably have to help pay for it. And guess what? The law actually agrees.
This brings us to this really clever legal workaround. It's a rule that basically says you can't have your cake and eat it too. If a deal gives you a benefit, like the right to use a driveway, and a related burden, like paying for its upkeep, you can't just take the good part and ignore the responsibility. So Claire can be forced to pay, but only if she chooses to use the driveway. She totally has the option to just not use it and avoid the cost altogether.
So the common law is a dead end for making Claire build that wall, and it's no help in stopping her from building a giant apartment block either. This just seemed wrong. So another set of rules, called equity, was developed to step in and find a fairer solution. And a case involving a very famous London landmark changed absolutely everything.
And here we are, Leicester Square in London. Believe it or not, back in the 19th century, this very garden became the center of a huge legal battle that pretty much created the modern rules for these covenants.
So here's the story. In 1808, the owner, a Mr. Tolk, sold the central garden area of Leicester Square. But as part of the sale, he made the buyer promise that the garden would be kept as a garden forever and, crucially, never be built on. A classic negative restrictive promise.
Well, years later, the land was sold again, this time to a Mr. Moxhay. Now, he knew all about the old promise, but since the common law said the burden didn't pass, he basically said, tough luck, I can build whatever I want, and the whole thing went to court.
The Court of Equity completely disagreed, and the judge's reasoning was really powerful. He said, look, if new buyers could just ignore these restrictive promises, it would be a total disaster. You could sell part of your land to a developer, only for them to turn around and build a giant factory next door, completely destroying the value of your own house. Equity had to step in and fix this.
And so the court created a new test, this 5-part checklist that allows the burden of a negative promise to actually stick to the land and bind new owners. Let's walk through it real quick. 1. The promise has to be negative, a don't, not a do. 2. It has to touch and concern the land, meaning it's about the land itself, not some random personal thing. 3. It has to actually benefit the land that the original seller kept. 4. It had to be intended to apply to future owners, not just be a one-time deal. And finally, number 5, and this is crucial, the new buyer has to have notice. They have to know about it, which today usually just means it's on the property's official record.
Okay, so we've got the strict, rigid rules of common law, and we've got the flexible, common-sense fix from equity. Now it is time for the final verdict. Let's apply all this back to our story and figure out exactly what Claire has to do.
This chart right here, this is the ultimate cheat sheet. It boils everything down perfectly. Look at the common law side. The rule is simple. The burden does not pass, except for that special driveway rule. But then look at the equity side. That's the real game changer. For negative promises, the burden can pass as long as it checks off all 5 of those boxes from the Leicester Square case. That is the crucial difference.
So let's get back to Claire, our new owner of Blue Acre. Let's take these 2 sets of rules, apply them to our 3 promises, and give her the final answer.
All right, let's break it down for Claire, promise by promise. First, the one-house rule. That's a classic negative promise. It's a don't do this. So the rules from equity apply, and yes, that promise is absolutely binding on her. Second, building the wall. Well, that requires action, so it's a positive promise. The common law says the burden does not pass, so Claire is off the hook for that one. And finally, the driveway payment. Also positive, but this is where our special exception kicks in. If she uses the driveway, she's gotta pay up. Simple as that.
So when you boil it all down, what the rules of equity did was transform a simple personal promise between 2 people into something way more powerful, a proprietary right, which is just a fancy way of saying it's a right that belongs to the property itself, not the person. The promise gets baked into the very fabric of the land, ready to bind whoever owns it, maybe for generations to come.
And that really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? Whether it's a rule against keeping chickens, a restriction on the color you can paint your front door, or a duty to maintain a historic wall, these hidden promises are all around us. Which kind of makes you wonder, what hidden promises might be attached to the land beneath your feet?